The sky had already begun to bruise when the car coughed its final breath. The engine sputtered, whined, and died in the middle of a narrow forest road, leaving only the echo of insects and a creeping silence that seemed to listen back. It was evening, one of those evenings that feels like it's holding its breath before something terrible happens. A cool wind carried the scent of damp leaves and something older, something that shouldn't have been there. The journey had started like any other, full of chatter, faint music from the car radio, and the comfort of being together. The family of 7, 2 parents, their children, and relatives were returning from a countryside visit, following a narrow road that cut through an endless stretch of forest. The sun had already started to dip behind the treetops, painting the sky with fading streaks of orange and violet. The air thickened with the scent of pine and soil, and as they drove deeper, the road grew narrower and lonelier. There were no streetlights, no houses, just the hum of the engine breaking through the quiet wilderness. Then, without warning, the car began to sputter. A strange knocking sound echoed from under the hood, followed by a sharp hiss of steam. The father slowed down, his brow furrowing in frustration. Within moments, the car jerked, coughed twice, and came to a complete stop. The headlights flickered once before dimming out completely, leaving them stranded in the growing dusk. They stepped out, expecting to see some smoke, a loose wire, something that made sense, but there was only silence. The surrounding forest felt alive, whispering through the wind. The youngest child clutched her mother's hand tightly, glancing nervously at the thick tree line. The air felt different here, heavier, colder. Every breath they took seemed to echo, as if the forest were breathing with them. When the father tried the ignition again, the engine refused to respond. The batteries seemed drained, lifeless. Their phones had no signal. It was as though they had crossed some invisible boundary where modern things simply stopped working. The light faded faster than they expected. Darkness gathered under the trees, swallowing the last trace of daylight. In that dim light, someone noticed a stone wall ahead, a low, old boundary wall, half hidden by moss and vines. Beyond it lay a small graveyard. 7 graves, perfectly aligned, their headstones gleaming faintly even in the dying light. The family exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the unnatural neatness of the place. There were no weeds, no fallen leaves, nothing out of place, as if someone tended to those graves even now. They debated whether to walk back down the road, but it stretched endlessly into the forest, with no sign of habitation for miles. The night was pressing in fast, and the forest sounds had begun to change, first crickets, then owls, and then something else, something deep and rhythmic, echoing faintly through the trees. Fear whispered among them, quiet but persistent. With nowhere else to go, they decided to camp near the graveyard, hoping the car would start by morning. They gathered what food they had left, lit a small fire, and huddled close, unaware that the forest was not empty and that they had already been noticed. The fire burned low, its flickering light throwing restless shadows on the ground as the family sat close, trying to find warmth and comfort in its fragile glow. The forest around them had grown utterly still, save for the occasional rustle that came from somewhere unseen. Every now and then, a faint crunch of leaves or the snap of a branch made someone turn sharply, eyes scanning the darkness. The father reassured everyone that it was only animals moving in the forest, though his own voice trembled slightly as he spoke. The youngest child had fallen half asleep in her mother's lap when a faint glow appeared in the distance, beyond the graves. At first, they thought it was another car approaching through the trees, but the light wavered too softly, moving with the slow rhythm of a handheld flame. As it drew nearer, they could make out the outline of an old man holding a lantern, the yellow light glinting off his pale, wrinkled face. The family froze as the stranger stepped into view. His clothes were old-fashioned, long, dusted with soil, and slightly damp from the evening mist. Yet he smiled faintly, a calm and strangely kind expression that contrasted sharply with the cold air around him. His voice was low and steady as he greeted them, asking if they needed help. The father explained their situation, the broken car, the lack of signal, the decision to camp for the night. The old man nodded thoughtfully, glancing once toward the 7 graves before lowering himself slowly to sit near their fire. He said it was not uncommon for travelers to lose their way near this forest, that the place often confused those unfamiliar with it. His words came out measured, each one deliberate, as if he was choosing them carefully. As the family began to relax in his presence, he lifted his lantern slightly, letting its glow spill across the graves. He asked if they had noticed how well kept the place was. Without waiting for an answer, he began to speak softly, telling them of the people buried there. His tone was calm but filled with a strange weight, as though he were reciting something sacred or long remembered. He told them that each grave held a story, some peaceful, some tragic, but all connected by the same night. His eyes, reflecting the firelight, seemed to look past them, into something unseen. The forest wind stirred, and his words began to blend with its whispering, carrying fragments of sentences that made the listeners shiver. The air grew colder, and for a moment, the flames flickered as if the night itself leaned closer to listen. The family sat in uneasy silence, drawn to the old man's voice but feeling a quiet dread settle in their bones, as if the ground beneath them remembered what he spoke of. The old man's tale lingered in the air long after his voice fell silent, a chilling stillness settling around the fire. The family sat huddled close, their faces pale and eyes darting between the graves and the dark forest that surrounded them. Just as the father was about to thank the old man for his company, a sound came from the shadows, a faint rustle, slow and deliberate, like footsteps on dry leaves. Everyone turned sharply, but before fear could rise, another figure appeared from behind the crooked trees. It was a woman this time, her hair tied loosely beneath a shawl, her face illuminated by the dying firelight. She greeted them softly, in a voice that carried both warmth and sorrow, saying she had seen the glow of their fire from afar. The old man smiled at her arrival and gestured for her to join them, as if he had been expecting her. The woman sat on a fallen log beside the fire and began speaking in the same gentle rhythm as the old man. Her words unfolded another story about a young bride who had wandered into the forest searching for her lost husband on a stormy night and was never found until morning, her body resting beside one of the very graves near where they sat today. The family listened, captivated yet uneasy, for every detail of her story seemed to match the air around them, the fog, the chill, the exact layout of the graveyard. When her voice trembled near the end, the mother instinctively pulled her children closer, unable to shake the feeling that the woman's eyes, though kind, were filled with something hollow and infinite. Moments after her tale ended, another voice came from the darkness, deep and rasping, followed by the arrival of a tall man carrying a walking stick. Then another figure followed him, and another, until 7 in total stood by the fire, men, women, and a small boy clutching an old wooden toy. One by one, each of them began to tell their stories. The air grew heavy as the night deepened, their words weaving together into a tapestry of death, betrayal, and sorrow. Every tale circled back to the same resting place, the 7 graves. The family sat frozen, unable to move or speak, feeling the boundary between the living and the dead thinning with every passing moment. The fire crackled weakly, shadows crawling across their faces like restless fingers. With each story told, the night seemed to grow colder, and a strange realization began to settle in: their hosts were not strangers who had joined them. They were the reason the graves were kept so neat. The night had thickened into a suffocating darkness, the kind that seemed to erase the stars and swallow sound itself. The fire had burned low, its orange heart flickering weakly as if struggling to stay alive against the cold breath of the forest. The 7 storytellers sat in silence now, their faces faintly lit, their eyes distant and still. The family barely spoke. Each of them felt a strange heaviness in their chest, a pressure that made every breath shallow. The youngest boy tried to whisper something to his sister, but his words died before reaching her ears, as though the air itself refused to carry them. Somewhere far off, an owl cried once and fell silent, and then a long, low moan drifted through the trees, rising and fading like the wind but shaped too much like a human voice to be ignored. The mother urged everyone to lie down, hoping sleep might calm their nerves until dawn. One by one, they settled beside the dying fire, wrapping themselves in thin blankets, eyes darting toward the graves. The forest was alive with whispers now, soft, dragging sounds, the faint crunch of leaves, the rhythmic thump of something that seemed to move closer, then vanish. The father lay awake, staring at the shifting glow of the embers, when he felt it first, a touch, light as breath, on his shoulder. He turned sharply, but no one was there. Before he could speak, the daughter let out a muffled cry. She said something had brushed against her hand. Another moment passed, and the mother gasped, clutching her arm. The sensation spread among them like an unseen ripple, cold fingers, soft movements, crawling pressure as though unseen hands were creeping over their bodies. They called out to the 7 figures for help, but the storytellers only stared at them, unmoving, their faces unreadable in the gloom. Then came the dreams. Each of them fell into a restless half-sleep, haunted by vivid, twisted images, the 7 graves, open and waiting, hands rising from the earth, pale faces whispering their names. Their cries broke through the night, overlapping until they all woke at once, drenched in sweat and trembling. The fire had nearly died, but the 7 figures were there again, standing around them, their lanterns glowing faintly, their voices low and soothing. They told the family it was only a nightmare, that the forest played tricks on weary travelers, that dawn was not far. Yet, even as the words flowed like calm water, the air seemed to hum with a deeper truth. The ground beneath them pulsed faintly, as though something beneath the graves was stirring, awake and listening, and their comforters' eyes reflected not warmth, but hunger. As the horizon began to pale with the first fragile hint of dawn, exhaustion clung to the family like a second skin. Their eyes were swollen from lack of sleep, their minds haunted by the grotesque dreams that had filled the night. The 7 figures who had soothed them through the darkness now stood silently near the graves, motionless, their faces unreadable in the grey light. The forest seemed quieter than before, too quiet. No birds sang. No wind stirred the leaves. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The father, desperate to distract himself from the unease, decided to occupy the final hour before daylight. He suggested they take some photographs to remember this strange, fearful night, half laughing as though trying to make light of their terror. The camera clicked in the cold morning air, capturing the 7 companions standing near the graves, the family gathered by the burnt-out fire, and the mist curling through the trees. The old man smiled faintly in one frame, the woman in the shawl rested her hand on the child's shoulder in another. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt normal, like an odd but harmless encounter. When the first glow of morning broke through the forest canopy, the 7 figures began to drift back toward the graves. They said nothing, only nodded gently as they disappeared one by one into the thickening fog. The family watched, unsure whether to thank them or run. Once the sun finally rose, the father managed to coax the car engine to life. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The sound of the motor felt like proof that reality still existed. Before leaving, one of the passengers, a young man who had been silent most of the night, decided to develop the photos using a portable Minilab kit stored in the car. He thought the pictures might help them make sense of everything later. But as the first images slid out, his expression changed from curiosity to frozen terror. His mouth fell open, his hands trembled violently. There were no figures, none of the 7 who had spent the night with them appeared in the photos. The graves, however, looked freshly dug, the soil dark and disturbed as if something had only recently emerged from beneath. The others crowded around, staring in disbelief as every photograph told the same impossible truth. Then, from somewhere beyond the trees, came a sound, low, hollow laughter echoing through the mist. The family turned to see the 7 shapes standing once again by their graves, smiling with eyes that no longer hid their hunger. Panic broke through reason as the travelers fled into the forest, screaming for help that would never come. Only one of them ever made it home to tell the tale, his voice forever trembling whenever the dusk began to fall.